Hey guys, this is our code from last time. So we started with a new language called Swift, which is the new developer language from Apple. And right now the developer environment, like this whole window is on Xcode, which you guys all have to install. So get that in by next meeting. And I'm just gonna go over what all of these things mean. So if you guys ever wanna look over it, you can just watch this video. So here, this import UIKit, if you're making an app, this is going to give you all the functionalities that you want to put in it. So for example, like buttons and stuff are going to come from the UIKit. In this program, we don't use any of the UI because there's no interface that we're using. UI stands for user interface. So there's no interface we're using, so we actually don't need that. Technically, we could comment it out. So I'm just going to do that. But it's included in every new program that you do in Swift. So the assignment that we had was to create like sort of a program that every single time that you would go on like a hike, it would save the name of the hike. So the name of, like, for example, Mount Everest, like let's say I hiked Mount Everest and I hiked it in 3 hours. So you'll probably see that down there. We'll get there later. But yeah, so we just want something that will record every single time we hike. It'll record the name of the mountain and the time of the hike. So here we have two classes. If this were like BYOB or Scratch, a class is like a sprite. So everything within this class only applies to that class, to that sprite, a lot like BYOB. So the first class is called ClimbInfo, and here we're just going to store two variables. One is peak name, and here we're going to store the name of the mountains, and we're saving it as a string. And a string is just, think of it as like a string of letters or a word, a sentence, anything. And right now it's blank because we're not going to input that until the end. So this is basically just saying variable peak name is a string, and in that string is nothing, it's empty. The next variable is the climb time, so it's how long it takes you to climb that mountain. And this is just saying the variable climb time is an integer, which equals 0, because we still haven't put in anything for the integer, so 0 is sort of our placeholder. And then that's the end of that class. So now onto our next class, or in BYOB and Scratch would be sort of like the next sprite. So here we have the variable climbs, and we're setting it equal to a list. A list can also be called an array. In a list, you can store multiple values. So var climbs is a list called ClimbInfo, and in that list is nothing. Right now it's nothing. In this list though, we're going to store all the names of our mountains and the names of like the time it took us to hike those mountains. And now here we're creating a function called addClimb. A function is sort of a command that a computer can use multiple times. So whenever I call that function, I can do something without having to type all this code, right? So here, oh, and a function has parameters. So whatever you input into the function is a parameter. So here, addClimb, our two parameters are peak name, which is a string because it's the name of the mountain, and then climb time, which is an integer because time is a number. So if we call this function, which we do later, we're going to input something for the string and something for the integer. So something for the name of the mountain and the time it took us to climb that mountain. And then here within these little curly brackets, we define the function. So in the function, we have a variable climb is ClimbInfo. Oh, that looks familiar up here. It's actually calling the first class. So it's saying variable climb is ClimbInfo, and it's just calling back this whole class, basically. What it's doing is calling the whole class. And that'll be important in the next couple lines. So here it's saying climb.peakName is peak name. Now that sounds sort of repetitive. It looks repetitive, but what it's saying is climb, which here we called it ClimbInfo. Technically, if I wanted to, I could replace this with ClimbInfo and then .peak name. But we just use the variable because the variable is a lot shorter. And then we can use it repetitively. So climb calling this class dot peak name, and now we're calling this variable. Remember, if we didn't have that climb, we would not be able to call that variable. So we're calling climb dot peak name, so this variable, and then we're setting it equal to the / peak name, which is one of the parameters for our function right here. This is what we're going to be typing in. And then we do the same thing with climb time. We call the class the variable climb time, and we put this parameter into climb time. And then here, climbs, this is plural. This is a little confusing, but this one is basically calling back this list that we made up here. And append means add to a list. So if you're appending something, you're adding it to a list, and we're basically adding climb. So we're adding both whatever is in ClimbInfo, which is peak name, and climb time. We're adding both of these into our list, ClimbInfo, so this won't be blank anymore. We close the function. This function we just used to explain what a function was at the beginning. It's actually really not necessary, so I'm going to comment all of that out. This little curly bracket right here is closing up the whole class. So this is sort of the end of your sprite. If this were BYOB or Scratch, this is your whole sprite. This is another sprite. And then here is the main. So in Java, for those of you who use Java, this is sort of like the main constructor, but I don't know. I don't like Java, but some of you do think in Java. So this is like main, and then this is like your setup, sort of. And then here we're setting the variable club equal to ClimbingClub. So here we're calling this class, the second class. Sort of remember here we called the first one. Now down here we're calling the second class. So and we set it equal to the variable club. So now here club, which is the same thing as ClimbingClub, dot addClimb, and addClimb is this function, and we can call it because we have called it from this class. If we had just put addClimb, we'd get an error. This doesn't tell me that I have an error, but that would be an error. So climb.addClimb. Oh, and then the parameters. So this is whatever you want to put into it. Here, I just wrote Mount Everest. You can write whatever you want, really, as long as it's in a string. So it has to be surrounded by quotation marks. And then the comma, which means that now you're going into your second parameter. And then here's where Swift is a little weird. So here we didn't have to write this / peak name thing, right? Because Swift already knew that it was there. I think that if I actually write the peak name, I get an error. But it's not telling me that I have an error, so we're just going to ignore that. But yeah, you don't need to write anything. And then, but for the second parameter, and if we had multiple parameters, every parameter after that, we would have to define what it is. So up here we said climb time. So here we also have to write climb time. And then we have to do this little colon thing, and then 3. Or you could do like 300 if it took you 300 hours. We didn't really specify whether it was hours or minutes or days. So I'll just keep it 3. It could be like 3 years, Mount Everest. And then here, oh, this was just me. I was just playing around trying to print things out, but I don't have the console open right now, and I don't know how to do that from memory. So, yep, that's Swift. We'll go more into depth on this next meeting. Yeah, we will still go over what a function is, what a class is, a variable. These little colons, for those of you who have used Java, you probably haven't really seen these before. And yeah, basically what everything means. We'll recap, and then we'll go into our to-do list. All right, thanks guys.